Hey, 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 so good to see you, even though I can't see you. It's another beautiful day in the neighborhood, and I'm so excited to have you here at the Perseverance Podcast. My name is Kelvin Crosby, and you probably know me as the Deafblind Potter, and you're going to come on this journey with me. There's something powerful about the number 3, and we're going to find on this Perseverance Podcast how powerful love can really change your life. But when you forgive somebody and you do it a third time, sometimes forgiveness can really transform your life. So this individual, we're going to go on her journey, and we're going to see how she was transformed with the number 3 in her marriage. Are you ready to go with me? Let's do this. Persevering is what can allow you to overcome. But you have to find joy in the pain that you live with. It's not going to be easy. But the reward and the character that you will build in persevering through your challenges will be so rewarding. It will give you so much hope. Are you ready to persevere through your challenges? Let's do this. Hey, Leah, welcome to the Perseverance Podcast.
Oh, thank you, Calvin. It's such an honor to be on the show with you. I have to tell you, I don't know how, Calvin, you're doing this. I mean, you're technically deaf and blind. How is it possible that you sound so good and you're so articulate? I don't get it.
Thank you so much. And what's cool about it is that everything that I'm doing is either going through a screen reader or a mixer, and you just got to figure out how to live beyond that challenge. And I think for myself as an individual, it's one of those things where I can do this. I just have to troubleshoot the problems and figure out where my weaknesses are and then try to eliminate the weaknesses.
It is a faith thing. It's not religious. I hate it when people say, oh, you're religious. I go, no, I am definitely faith-based, and I'm so grateful to have that. But when you activate your faith, God shows up, and that's how it's got to be with you. Or this couldn't be right now, you and I. There's no way that in the natural should work like it does, because then people are going to listen to you and think, oh, he's not really blind, especially if the first time, if they just happen to be curious. But it's real, and no different than my 3 marriages to the same person. Again, that number 3. I can't wait till we talk about the powerful 3. Yes. But my 3 marriages were real to that same person, and God honored our 3rd one because we kept our promise.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to be so powerful, what we're going to do today. As you were talking about, one of the biggest blessings that I have is I'm not affected by first impressions. Mm-hmm. Because first impressions are probably the weakest thing that we have as human beings. Mm-hmm. And one of the most beautiful things when I get to have a first impression with somebody, I get to give them all of who I am because I can't see them. Mm-hmm. And doesn't matter how wealthy you are or how poor you are, you're going to get all of me in that moment the first time you meet me. What I present to somebody the first time could literally transform their life because I made that first impression all of who I could be. Mm-hmm. So before we jump into the 3 marriages, first, I want to know what your childhood was like.
I grew up in a very active Italian family, very emotional, very high energy driven. Our dinner conversations were not quiet, needless to say. And it's a lot like you see in movies. Italian families have that craziness, and it's outspoken and very transparent too. Mm-hmm. If you were to interview my sister and brother, they would say that I lived in La La Land. They would make comments like, you didn't really grow up in this family. Because every child has a different image of how they grew up. Their circumstances were different. We see things differently, and why can we be from the same family and have such different reactions?
Yeah. My wife is one of 6, and each one of them had a different perspective on
Yes,
life.
perspective. My family was kind of middle class. We had a good life, and there were moments that were tough. Father that's Italian, very strict with an 8th grade education, but spoke 4 languages, very street savvy person. In some ways, our family was a little bit like the Godfather, the original one, because he had a lot of no-neck friends. I used to call them no-necks. They would be they looked scary, but they were the neatest people, in the world. Marriage relationship was important in my family,
Yeah.
And I wanted lots of kids.
As you grew up, you found yourself in LA, right?
Yes, we grew up in LA. We sure did.
And so you took some leaps.
Well, Anaheim, California, actually.
Well, that's LA.
Newport Beach. Yeah, outside of LA.
You still got the smog and the traffic.
Oh, we got it all. Yeah, but we also had a half hour from the beach. And it was different then, too, than it is today. Our whole world, Calvin, is so different today.
Yeah. So we know that Charlie Momford's going to be listening to this. So what fan are you? A Dodgers fan, Angel fan, or a Rockies fan? Of course I'm a Rockies fan.
Do you think I would not be a Rockies fan? No, I love the Rockies. And Charlie and Dick both were, amazing men to take that on.
And just for those that are new to the Perseverance podcast, you can definitely check out Charlie Momford's story. It would be April podcast that went out. Show you how a man that had everything had one big weakness that lasted for a very long time and affected a lot of people, but can be saved.
Yeah.
Because it's never too late to be saved. And that's going to be the deciding part as we move forward into your journey. But I want to get into a little bit before we get into that part about your acting career and what you did before, and then how you met your husband and where all that led. And so you're in LA.
Yeah. I grew up in Anaheim, California. Acting, theater was my passion. I was acting when I was 3. We'd be playing with our dolls, and my little girlfriends I'd say, why aren't you playing? Why aren't you? They're just sitting there with their legs crossed watching me, because they said, well, our babies are sleeping. And so they're bored and they're just watching me. I love to be on the stage, and I was very dramatic, and I loved entertaining, sharing my heart. That's kind of what it was about. But I never thought of it as acting. It was just a part of who I was. So that just followed me right all the way up. And at 16, had an agent, and I was doing some Dallas and just shows, Farmers' Daughters, lots of shows. That's what I thought I wanted to do, of course, and become. But it sure took me away from that, with my marriages to Mike, because he was cattle person. So we lived not in LA. We lived, in Merced, California, where acting was not really convenient, if you know what I mean. So, but anyway, long story short, I met Mike. He was ahead of me in school. He was 3.5 years older, and my brother's best friend. And actually, I met him first hiding in my brother's closet. It's my sister trying to overhear all the big boy talk. And that's the first time I saw him. I was 12. And I knew from that day. And that's kind of how it all began. Long process, a strict process. My dad, being Catholic Italian, it was a little difficult, but I knew that it would be Mike. But because we don't have time for all the little nuances, I found Christ through his church. I was raised Catholic. But at that time in Catholic churches, you didn't even breathe, let alone say hallelujah or something. And in Mike's church, he was Pentecostal. I couldn't even tell my parents, because I thought if they knew I went to church with him that I would go to hell for sure. But I didn't know the Lord personally. At 17 years old, I found Christ, and that changed everything for me.
As you found Christ, and you're seeing this handsome dude that just steals your heart, So when did things start really becoming serious for you guys?
Well, I left for the summer to spend the summer with my parents' best friends. And then Mike and I were broken up. We broke up all the time. We used to have fights over whose dad could beat up whose dad. I mean, just the stupidest. We still continued for a few years with stupid fights. But I left and he went on his little way. I went on my way, and I was gone for the summer and I came back. And of course, we saw each other that night. He had a date. I broke my date, but he didn't. But I did tell him that you can't come to my house any later than 10 o'clock. I said that my dad is never going to let me go out with you. He'll be asleep on the couch, which he was. But you better not be later than 10 because we'll probably have to be back by 10:30 just in case he wakes up. Well, anyway, he did get there at 10. The fact is, we went off and talked, and the next thing you know, we're on a freeway, LA, driving in his new Corvette that he had. It was so foggy that we had to pull over. I mean, dangerously foggy. The point is that there was a lot of time to really talk. And the next thing you know, the fog lifted. I just got out of the car. And he says, I said this, but I say he said it. He goes, then marry me. He said, I'm tired of all the games. I'm tired. Just marry me right now. And I said, okay. Or he said, okay, whichever one did it first. But the fact is, that's what we did. And we eloped. And that was the beginning of our marriage. And the eloping and what happened with all that's another story. It's another podcast. We can't get into that. The fact is, we did get married. There were a lot of fun obstacles in that one, too. But we didn't take anything serious. The most important thing here is the promise. You know that promise you make when you stand up there and you promise you'll do this and that forever and ever. I don't know that people really think about that, because Mike was a man that you could shake his hand on a deal and make a promise. He wouldn't break it. But marriage for us was almost like a game. In this third marriage, we had that faith at that time because of the promise that we made. We couldn't even make it before it was 8 years, barely, 10 years, barely, fighting all the time, miserable. And the third marriage was almost like heaven. And I can tell you that. It was beyond beautiful.
Before we get into the third marriage, to kind of put into people's perspective, because there's people here that are listening today, you're struggling. I mean, I know there's several people that listen to the podcast that are in the middle of having a divorce.
I know. So painful. Breaking up.
One of the things that was taught to me in premarital counseling was the triangle of marriage. Because part of persevering in your challenges in your marriage is making sure your triangle in your marriage is working great. In a triangle, all corners touch, and each part of the corners has a purpose. When you look at the triangle, you have God at the top, and then you have your spouse on one side and you on the other side. And it's a continuous relationship. Because if your relationship with God is always first, then your relationship with your spouse will continue to work. Because it continues to be a triangle. If your spouse is having a relationship with God and you're having a relationship with God, then between you and your spouse, that's going to be an amazing relationship. Because at the end of the day, you keep persevering through the challenges. And when you make it biblically founded, your rule books are there. Your structure's there. Just, do you want to follow the rules? Do you want the guidance? Do you want that structure in your life, in your marriage, to keep living beyond your challenges? So, Leah, tell us, in your first marriage, what kind of led us to the first divorce?
The first divorce was over the kid thing. I'm Catholic, so I reverted back to being that. And he wasn't as committed in the first marriage to Christ. He knew Christ. He grew up in a Christian home, but he didn't have the personal experience with Christ like we should have. And either one of us. We were young. I was 18 years old, and he's going to be 22. your kids, really, when I look back on all that, we didn't have the tools.
Mm-hmm.
And we sure didn't understand when you make a promise and stand before God what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people get that really what it means. And we didn't. And it was easy for us to get in a big fight and say it's over and we didn't care, and that was the end of it, and get divorced and still connect with each other and then get married again and get divorced again. I don't think we had the tools. We tried to in the second marriage. There were more. We had a better understanding in that, but still, it wasn't until we promised to go into counseling, and I'll just quickly add this. We met with a pastor that I love. He wasn't too eager to do this at first, but it was going to be the only thing we had that was going to save us, I said. And anyway, we met with this pastor, and he agreed to take us on for 1 year. And we had to promise that we would stay with him 1 year, that we would see each other, but not live together, not sleep together, just learning how to be friends for 1 year and continue on with counseling.
Well, before we get there, let's just put it this way. A marriage is not all about sex.
No, it's not.
Everybody thinks it is. A marriage is about a relationship. A marriage is about a relationship between you and God and your spouse. There's 3 people in your marriage. You, God, and your spouse. It's very similar to the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Because each one of them has their strengths. And each one of them has different powers and abilities. It's the same thing here in a marriage. And as Leah is talking about her marriage, she's also explaining the third person wasn't there.
He wasn't first, like you're saying. We said, especially in the second marriage, oh yes, now we know, we learned nothing until you are committed, that you are totally sincere.
And just to kind of get it going into the third marriage here. So with the first marriage, you were young, and God wasn't really the center of anything. That broke it up.
First, your children, because I was young playing dolls and house in the first marriage, I was totally into that. I wanted 5 babies and the wife. I just wanted to play house. The second marriage, you're a little bit grouchy, rebellious. And I treated Mike like he was my father, which he wasn't, but that's how he treated me like I was still 12. And in the third marriage, we were both adults. That changed.
As we get through this journey, for first, second marriage, it falls apart. And then you're talking to your pastor, and he says, you got to make a promise to me.
That's right.
He was the beginning stage of this triangle starting to happen in your life.
The real truth, yes.
He held you to God's standard.
Oh, did he ever?
He was trying to make this triangle happen for your marriage. Tell us about the moment that you stepped in his office.
That didn't go well with Mike. Mike was his own man. He was older. He thought, this is ridiculous. I'm not doing it. But because I have such a childlike faith, and because I loved him so much, and I believed that we had no other choice but to commit to this, that I said, I'll just commit. And Mike goes, well, I'm not. Leah, this is stupid. I said, well, this is what he expects from us, Mike. I'm willing to do it. Are you not willing? He said, no, I'm not willing. I'm not doing it. I said, fine. So we didn't see each other for 6 weeks. And I continued on to counseling by myself. And then one day he came in and said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. That God had really revealed to him that he needed to do this to win our marriage back. And so he did. He started coming to counseling for 6 months. He was very faithful.
But then 6 months comes into play. You're falling in love in a whole new way.
Yes, we're learning to be friends, yes.
But the problem is the word promise became a major issue. So tell us that story.
Okay, well, the promise seemed to be lessening for both of us. It seemed to get lost in this translation. We wanted to be together. We were tired of it. It's 6 months. We'd learned our lesson. So what we did was fly off to Canada, and we were going to get married there. And then call Pastor and tell him that we're married. We want to thank you for everything. It was because of you. And it was going to be wonderful, we thought. I bought a dress there, and it's beautiful. We stayed at the Princess Hotel. We had our separate rooms. We were totally honorable through this time. Still honorable, but done with it. Right the night before, we had dinner, and we were together talking. And I said, Mike, let's call Pastor Jack. Let's just let him know what we're going to do. I believe we owe him that. I just feel guilty somehow. Something's bothering me. And he goes, well, if you want to, I think it's a nice thing to do. It's a nice gesture. So we did. We called him together. I spoke to him first, and he was real quiet. He was so quiet on the phone. I thought, oh, he's so sweet. He understood everything. And we told him how much we admired him and everything that he had shared with us. We've learned our lesson. It's been 6 months, and we're ready to start our third marriage. Pretty soon, after he listened to Mike and listened to me being stupid, he goes, are you both done? And I said, yes, we are. Now I'm on the phone. Mike is off the phone. He got a coffee or something. And we're feeling very proud of ourselves. And he goes, well, you will never have my blessing, ever. I go, what? There was this numbness that came over me. And I go, what? So I put him on speakerphone. I said, will you say that again? So he did. And Mike goes, well, I'm sorry, like a guy. And then he said, I'm so disappointed in both of you. He said, your promises mean nothing. I don't even know if I can do this without getting emotional. He goes, they mean nothing to you. I absolutely regret ever taking you both on. But you have to do what you have to do. Then his wife got on the phone. Mike was pacing at this time in the room. I was crying. And I said, but we did everything you said. We've done everything. We haven't been together. It's been 6 months. He said, you said you would give me 1 year. You said that you promised before me and before God for another, the third time now? You'll never have my blessing. You do what you want. So we hung up the phone. And you can imagine the mess that I was in with Mike. He was upset. He wasn't like I was. He was more upset. And then we ended up having a fight. I ended up flying home by myself. It was awful. I can put that right up there with one of the worst days of my life. I never felt so ashamed and so sick. Mike and I didn't see each other for a couple months. I continued back on with counseling. I said, I want to finish this with you. I don't care if he's here or not. And then one day again, Mike walked in and said, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And so we started from there. We didn't have to go back like 6 months, but we lost another 2 months. And we started right there, and we finished.
What's so awesome about your pastor? He was a physical representation of your promise to God. He gave you the physical human being of what God expects of you.
Yes.
The promise that you make to him, what you're going to do for him. And I think that's what's so powerful about this story. Persevering through challenges means that the short term is going to be hard. It's going to hurt. It's going to be angry. It's going to be sorrowful. It's going to have pain. What's so powerful about what I love this story is God, when he says, I want you to do something, and it's not easy, and it's full of suffering and pain and frustrations and annoyance and irritations and tears and hatred, and what you find is that as a believer, you're making a promise for the rest of your life. And what's so beautiful about Leah's story and Mike's story and the pastor was that triangle for them a physical representation of what God was expecting of them in their marriage. Because honestly, think about that wedding that you had on your third marriage. It wasn't like what you had in Canada, you thought.
No, it's not. Our wedding for our third marriage, of course, we got teased by our friends. You can imagine. No wedding gifts. I'm not giving you another gift until you make that marriage last 10 years. But our third marriage, that night, that was magical. The night was magical. The weather was magical. It was just magical in that way. But it was the promise. That's where it comes down to. So when I hear marriages falling apart and I hate him, I can never love him again, all the things I've said too. Let me tell you, when you truly are sincere about putting God first, then that miracle happens. How could it be? It was like the first time for the rest of our lives. Enough so that when I got a little letter from Mike, I found later after he passed, and we always said forever. I'll love you forever, forever. He wrote forever used to seem like a long time, but now it doesn't seem long enough.
Mm-hmm.
And to feel that way after 30 years of marriage, where I couldn't feel that way after 8 years or barely 8 or barely 10 of misery. And people, if you're out there and you have a miserable marriage, you can change it. And what he did for us, he could do for anyone. He did it for Jonah in the whale. There's so many stories in the Bible. He didn't want to do what God wanted him to do, and he ended up in the whale's belly.
And then he did it wrong again, but
and then he did it wrong again, and then he did it right. You're right.
Yeah. So you're married and you have a son, and your promise is being fulfilled.
Yes.
But then that promise became a real promise.
A test. Oh, major test. Beyond test.
So tell us about the last 5 years of Mike's life and the journey that you had to go through.
I would never have been able to sustain the last 5 years that we had with Mike had I not had the commitment for that promise. I would have walked. We didn't know what was wrong with him. He lived on the edge. Mike barefoot water skied. He stadium jumped. He motocross raced. He skied down mountains he shouldn't have. Just crazy stuff. He always has. We tandem water skied even and almost killed each other in that. But the point is, he had a horrible fall on one of our trips. He hurt himself badly, had a horrible concussion, and he never really was the same. Within 8 months, it reveals itself, and it's aphasia and frontal temporal dementia, and they didn't have a name for it 5 years ago. Now Bruce Willis is going through that. Other famous athletes are going through it. They know what it is now. But these men turn into like a caged animal, and they do the most outrageous things that would never be fitting their personalities. They'd never in a lifetime Mike would do the things that he went through. And people that knew him well, Charlie, Dick, so many people, Bruce, and people that went through this with Mike, his best friends, all the dairymen, John, and of course my son Chad. This is a guy that never had an argument with the son. They would come to me and whine, but they never ever had an argument, the two of them. Chad idolized Mike and Mike idolized Chad. The last 5 years was a major test for all of us. We couldn't control them. You couldn't keep them in a hospital because they're so smart that they could talk their way out of anything. And it's a very difficult thing. Mental illness, I still don't really understand it, but I have compassion and the inclination now. I never had it before. But the point is, it was kind of a thing where you just say, I can't deal with this. I can't live like you're living. I can't do this anymore. And there were times I thought that way, but God just kept me steadfast. And I know why, because we learned it 30 years earlier. When you commit to someone and you promise in sickness and in health, till death do you part.
See, this is the beauty of the triangle in marriage. is when you live a life where you put God at the center of the triangle and you and your spouse are on the corners. It's a complete circuit that allows you to lean into God so that you can lean into each other. But when the other person on the triangle, your spouse, is struggling, the triangle is not broken because you make the promise. Because the promise is there and you're not willing to break the promise. The triangle will stay forever strong, meaning that God will always be in the center of that pain. And I know a little bit more of Leah's story in this time and journey where she was on her knees and asking God, well, how do I get through this pain? But again, the triangle was there. And because the triangle was there, the circuit to God was already there. And she can lean on him. So tell us a little bit more on that leaning on God during this time.
Do you know the true story in the Bible about the blind man? When Jesus walked up to him and said, "What do you want?" It stuck with me because he wanted that man to say, "I want to see again. I want you to heal me." He wanted the words, Calvin. He wanted those words. He wanted the blind man to say, "I want to be healed." He wanted to hear that. And I think that's what happened with us, because during Mike's illness, there were times I wished he'd had cancer. God forbid, because I've been through dear friends that have had cancer, but at least they were mentally well. You know what I mean? They weren't hurtful, painful experiences both Chad and I had to go through. I just believe with all my heart that Jesus wants our faith. We have a destiny to fulfill, and I believe that he wants us to fulfill that destiny. But we need to use our words. The words are our actions, and words then become habits. And I've heard it said that. And then the habit becomes your character, and your character becomes your destiny. And I just think sometimes we get so hung up on ourselves, we forget to say, "God, I need you. I need you to take this over. I need you to make the crooked places straight."
It's such a powerful thing. Before we wrap up, tell us about the last moments with Mike.
Well, that was a difficult time, but there was the most powerful moment. We brought him home. He'd been in the hospital for 2 years, in and out. I was there every day. And during COVID, we were only allowed an hour. You know how awful it was for people. God forbid, some people weren't even allowed to be with the people they loved. But anyway, I brought him home. I said, enough. Actually, Penny, one of my dear friends, said, "Get him home." And I did, but Chad was nervous about bringing him here. He's a lot to handle. He's a big guy, and it would take 3 people around the clock to take care of him. Most people with ALS, or I should say frontal temporal dementia, 50% approximately, will die of ALS in the end of their life. They live anywhere from 6 to 8 years once it's onset. And he lived 6 years, basically. We brought him home, and he was paralyzed now. It took 3 people to get him from a wheelchair to a bed to a shower. And one person would have to hold his arms behind their neck because he couldn't even lift his arms. He is totally paralyzed. He was at the end of life. So we were going to just be there to the end and make it work the best way we could. Because at the end of his life, the very end of his life, Mike lifted both arms, one at a time, lifted by himself while he was lying in bed, with his fingers moving like a child does when a child wants you to pick them up, how they'll lift their arms to you and move their little fingers. That's what he did that he couldn't have done on his own. This is something he could not have done. It was only the power of God, and the look on his face was lit up. I believe it was Jesus that just came and got him. And we were all there and watched it. I mean, I have witnesses to this. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced in my life. I remember saying to him, "Mike, what do you see?" Oh, tell me, what do you see? What do you see? And then he quietly put them down and left.
And that's what's so beautiful. In his perspective, it's just a moment. For us on earth, it seems like a very long time.
Remember what he said? Forever seems like a long time, and now it doesn't seem long at all.
Today, my listeners, have you lost a loved one? You wish they were here right now. Because we all know my story. As a deaf-blind individual, it's tough living this life. But I gotta live this life for Christ. Remember that loved one and know they're only gone for a moment. But because we live in time, it seems forever. So my encouragement to you, to not look at the death of your loved one like it's forever. It's just a moment. And you continue to move forward in your life today. And moving forward in a way that you are furthering and persevering through your challenges, so that when you see your loved one in heaven, you get to tell that loved one all the things that God had done in your life, with them and without them. And that loved one will be so proud of who you are. Leah, I want to thank you for being on the Perseverance podcast.
I loved it. Thank you so much, Kevin.
So that wraps up the Perseverance podcast. Here comes the Perseverance Corner. So this is James 1, 2 through 4.
Count it all joy, my brothers, when you fall into various temptations, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing.
I share this with you today because if we really think about this passage, it takes a lot of patience when we're persevering through our challenges. Because when we persevere through our challenges, there are things that are going to come up in a relationship, just like Leah's, where your joy in the Lord is what's going to hold you through to keep going forward. In return, it gives you hope. It gives you hope that you can keep going forward and that you can keep going through the process. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but what it does mean, you'll never be left alone. Because God is going to be there because He promised to you that He's going to be there. Just like Leah's story, they had to go through the pain in their relationship so that they could figure out the promise in their relationship. But once they finished the triangle and added God to their relationship, the full triangle was there. And that's my encouragement to you today is God in the center in your triangle in your relationships? Whether that's your marriage, whether that's your kids, whether that's your friend, are you allowing God to be the point at the top of your triangle so that way you, as an individual, can keep persevering through your challenges, finding joy in the Lord, having patience through the challenges, and allowing God to give you the hope to keep going forward. And here comes the announcement. First thing on the announcement is the Northeast Colorado campaign for 100 Simi canes to give away to those that live in the Northeast Colorado, like Eaton, Greeley, Fort Collins, Loveland, Estes Park, and other little towns in the neighborhood. This campaign, our goal is to be able to transform people's lives in this community. So this is also where Spencer lives, and he's been a major help through this journey. And together, we're going to raise enough for 100 canes to give away in the community. And if we go past that amount, that's even better. And I'm looking forward to be able to do that as well. So second thing in the announcement is a really important thing. And this is the $60,000 Simi cane mold campaign. And this is going to start September 1st. Unlike the Northeast Colorado, that started in August. This one is specific, and this is more of a national campaign. This is to raise money for the Simi cane mold, so that way we can make the Simi canes more affordable and make it so that way I don't keep losing money on the Simi canes. Because that's the biggest issue right now, is costing a ton of money to make the Simi canes. Right now it's costing me $230 to make them, and I only sell them at $200. That's not a really good business plan. So that's what I'm trying to do, is raise enough money for the mold so that way we can make a bunch of handles and stick them on the canes and have a really powerful handle as well at a low cost. So you can find that all these two campaigns at simicane.com. Another thing for the announcement, this isn't free to do. I don't normally talk about my money issues with regards to Perseverance Podcast. I don't know if I even brought it up. But because I've been so focused on Simi Cane and not so much Deafblind Potter, there isn't a lot of money left to keep running this whole platform. And so if you're able to support that and help me keep this thing going, I would love for your support. There's a link in the Deafblind Potter platform, and you can go to deafblindpotter.com and you can donate there. And lastly, I want to encourage you. The world's getting nastier and nastier. Don't look into the darkness, but look into the light and allow God to give you joy in the times where everything seems so dark. Because what will end up happening is people will see you and they will say, there's something different about you. There's nothing more rewarding when you hear somebody say, there's something different about you. And that only comes through having a relationship with the Lord and turning your eyes to His light and having joy in your pain, persevering through the challenges and building a character that has hope. That's all for my announcements. I'll see ya in 2 weeks. Go live beyond your challenges. Now you ready to persevere through your challenges today. Thank you for joining me on the Perseverance Podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can email me at kelvin@perseverancepodcast.com. You can also follow me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Deafblind Potter. If you'd like to buy some merch or some Deafblind Potter pieces, you can go to deafblindpotter.com. Please give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Perseverance Podcast so you don't miss an episode. That way, you and I can continue living beyond our challenges and persevering through them too.